And one, two, three. Welcome, everybody, to the Life Point Table Talk podcast. My name is Jason, and today we are coming in on week 23 of our Bible reading reflection. Thank you all for joining in and following along. And if you haven't been following along, that's all right too. Jump on in. And so we are on week 23 here. We are cruising along, and today, as always, we have quite a bit to cover. And I just want to say I really have enjoyed doing this Bible reading in a year with this specific program, the old and the new. And part of what I like is it keeps you at a quick pace. The chunks are pretty big. I know some folks aren't going to want to read that much, but it keeps it in biblical narrative form, which is basically just it keeps it a story. So you're not getting too bogged down with rabbit trails and too much theological stuff, because you got to keep going, and the story keeps on going. And so I like that, because it is a story. It's a different way to look at it. So anyways, this week, like I said, week 23, we're at 2 Chronicles. We got 2 Chronicles 13 through 33 and John 14 through 18. And let's jump into it. We got a lot to do in Chronicles here. And basically, this is retelling of Kings. So we went through a lot of this through Kings. But again, there's some different information here. It tells it from a little bit of a different perspective, and some really great stuff in here. So let's jump in. So the kingdom has just been divided. There was David, then Solomon, and then his son Rehoboam and Jeroboam split the kingdom. So there's Israel and Judah, and they're pretty much immediately at war with each other too. And last time a prophet had come in between them and stopped them, but they are still fighting each other. And so we have Rehoboam's son has become king of Judah. Abijah, king of Judah, and Jeroboam is still king of Israel, and there is war between them. Abijah challenges Jeroboam because he believes God promised David's family, which he did, to rule over all of Israel and Judah. And that Jeroboam conspired against Rehoboam when he was young and took advantage of his youth, and Jeroboam and their people have rejected God. And as Abijah is giving this speech to Jeroboam, Jeroboam's army, Israel's army, surrounds them, and Judah's army begins to pray to God. And Abijah leads them into battle, and Judah's army wins. They kill 500,000 Israeli troops. And it says Judah won because they trusted God. And after this, Abijah becomes more powerful, and Jeroboam becomes less powerful. Man, there's so much to go through here. I will try to not leave stuff out, but we gotta keep it moving. Abijah dies, and his son Asa becomes king. Again, it lists these guys as, it immediately says they follow God or not. Asa followed God and led Judah to worship God. He destroyed the other gods, so God blesses Judah with peace while Asa was king. which is good to know. It wasn't always warfare going on. There were times of peace and stability for these people. And he builds up the walls and the defense towers, fortifies the city, builds up his army. This is pretty incredible. They are attacked by, it says, Zerah the Cushite, or Ethiopian, has this leader of a huge army. It says 1 million people in this army marched against Judah. Asa prays to God that God will help them, and God delivers them and helps them defeat this mind-boggling army, 1 million people. Judah takes home a huge plunder from this. The prophets, Azariah comes to Asa the king, encouraging him to help or seek God, and God will help him. There is suffering and chaos throughout all the other lands surrounding Judah, and the prophet says it's because they're not following God. But if he will follow God, they will have peace there. So he does. He swears allegiance to God, and the people make an oath to God. And it says during that time, many people came to live in Judah because God was with them, protecting them. It was kind of a secure place in the middle of a whole lot of other chaos going on. He also rebuilds the temple, begins rebuilding the temple. This happens a lot. It gets built up and then torn down, and then built up and torn down. It says there was peace in Judah until Asa's 35th year. And so the 36th year of his reign, King Baasha invades Judah. The king of Judah takes the gold from his palace in the Lord's temple and makes a treaty with the king of Syria to try to help him out. And Syria sends in troops and helps out Judah because they paid him a bunch of money. But then the prophet goes to the king of Judah, and tells him what he did was wrong because he depended on the king of Syria instead of God. And he says, now you will never defeat Syria, and you will never be at peace again. It says at this time the king becomes angry and he's cruel to the prophets and to his people. And he gets a disease. It has these details in here, but refuses to seek the Lord for help, and eventually dies from it. After Asa, Jehoshaphat, his son, becomes king. He follows God, and God blesses him. Jehoshaphat becomes very rich and respected. He has the Lord's law taught through all of Judah. Even the Philistines and surrounding nations eventually start bringing him gifts, and it says they're all afraid of the Lord. But as we get into 18, Jehoshaphat signs a peace treaty with Israel's king Ahab. Ahab wants Jehoshaphat to help him to attack. There's a battle there, and they join forces for this war, and it gets into this interesting story. Jehoshaphat wants assurance from God that it's the right thing to do, and so they bring in all these prophets, and Ahab has his prophets who come and tell him what they want to hear, that they'll have victory. But there's another prophet, and Jehoshaphat is not satisfied with these other guys, so they bring in this other one, and Micaiah, and it's fascinating. They press this guy. Ahab doesn't want to bring him in because he always brings bad news, and so they eventually bring him in. They press him, and at first he just says, "Yes, it's going to be great. Like all the other prophets, you're going to have success." And they keep questioning him, and then he relents and tells them what he actually saw. And what he saw was God enthroned with his heavenly assembly, and he's asking them who will go and deceive Ahab so that he dies in this battle. And a spirit steps forward and says, "I will, and I will go be a lying spirit through Ahab's prophets." And there's a lot there. That's a huge rabbit trail for me. But keeping going, Ahab is mad. He still doesn't listen. He has the prophet put in prison. And so they go and attack and go into this battle anyways. And Ahab dies in this battle, exactly as was prophesied to him. At this point, it gets into, we're at 19. Prophet Jehu confronts Jehoshaphat and says he should not have been involved with Ahab's war, but because he served God, God has mercy on him. Jehoshaphat encourages the people of Judah to follow God. He appoints judges and Levites over these judges as officials. So Jehoshaphat's one of the better kings here. Eventually, all these other nations come together to attack Judah. The Moabites, the Ammonites. They all come together, this huge army, and surround Judah. Jehoshaphat calls on the people to fast and seek God. He assembles everyone and prays to God for help. And it's interesting because in the prayer he's noting how these were nations that God had told Israel to leave alone when Israel was coming into Egypt, and he mentions how they had mercy on these nations, and now these nations were repaying them by attacking them. And so while they're there together praying, the Spirit of God comes on Jehaziel, and he prophesies, and he says, "Don't be afraid. The battle is not yours, but God's. March against them. Don't attack, but just take your positions. God's going to fight the battle for you." So the next day they march out, and this is pretty cool. Jehoshaphat appoints musicians to play and praise ahead of the warriors, and they're going ahead of them, singing thanks to the Lord. They often sing this certain phrase, "Give thanks to the Lord, for his loyal love is forever." Something to that effect. They during this time, they sing that song a lot. When they began to praise the Lord, God suddenly attacks the enemy. The enemy actually, he confuses them, and they begin attacking themselves, and they end up wiping each other out. These different nations end up fighting amongst themselves and wiping each other out. By the time Judah gets up to them, there's nothing but a bunch of dead bodies everywhere. And so Judah carries off a huge plunder. And this is pretty cool. They call the place where God led them to victory the Valley of Barakah, or Barachah, something like that. And the valley where they blessed and praised the Lord and had victory. So they return praising and rejoicing. It says after that, all the nations feared God. Jehoshaphat's kingdom enjoyed peace. They were secure on every side. So a time of peace now for Judah. Jehoshaphat was king 25 years. After he dies, his son Jehoram is king. Jehoram takes the kingdom and kills all his brothers. Not a good way to start. And he also has married Ahab's daughter, Ahab and Jezebel's daughter. And these the people in Israel, they're actually very much involved serving other gods. And back when we were talking about how Jehoshaphat had joined Ahab to fight that battle, part of the deal was that they had peace because these Judah and Israel were always at war, but they joined together. Part of them joining together, Jehoshaphat had the royal families intermarry. So he had his son marry Ahab's daughter, and she has an influence, a big influence on the kingdom. And so Jehoram now follows in Israel's ways, which were evil like Ahab. But God spares him, it says, because of the promise he made to David. And so Elijah the prophet confronts Jehoram that God's going to afflict the people in your family. And it's pretty graphic. It says he's going to have a disease, an intestinal disease. It's pretty nasty. And shortly after this, the Philistines attack. They take everything. And Jehoram now has this incurable disease and dies a painful death. Only his son Ahaziah is left. But Jehoram was an evil king. It says no one regretted his death, and he didn't receive a royal burial. His son Ahaziah becomes king. He does evil like Ahab's family. He's influenced by his mother Athaliah, which is Ahab's daughter. He joins Ahab's son Joram in battle. Again, they're joining together, and they're in this battle together. Then they have retreated from this battle, and so it's the two kings together. Ahab's son Joram of Israel and Ahaziah of Judah. And this gets into the story where God has ordered Jehu to basically take revenge or deal out justice to Ahab's family. And Ahaziah has become connected. So they all end up getting it. So Jehu meets both of these guys. He kills Joram and all of Ahab's family, and eventually tracks down Ahaziah and puts him to death as well. And when Ahaziah is killed, his mother Athaliah, which is Ahab's daughter, decides to kill all his relatives so she can rule. So she takes over. But they hide Joash, his son Joash, and they hide him in the temple. And he hides in the temple for 6 years while she ruled. And then we get into the story of how eventually he is brought up. Jehoiada, who is a priest in the temple, makes a pact with all the officers throughout Judah, and they go to the Levites and the heads of the families in Israel, the leaders, and he's telling them how God had promised David's descendants to be kings, so they should make his son Joash king. So they all make a covenant together. It's basically a coup. They are going to get rid of Athaliah, and so they all come together, and he makes the Levites guard over Joash at all times. They place guards around the temple, and they have this ceremony where they anoint Joash king. And it was coordinated coup, and so they're all shouting, "Long live the king!" And Athaliah hears it, the big celebration, and comes down to see what it is. And she sees what's going on, and she's shouting treason. And they take her out and execute her, and they make Joash king. And it's basically insinuating she was not a kind ruler, because all the people are happy now that Joash is on the throne. And it literally says the land has rest because they killed Athaliah. Joash reigns for 40 years. He was only 7 years old when he became king. He repairs the temple. He does a long story, but he does a huge collection for the temple. Everybody gives this incredible offering of silver. Jehoiada, the man who helped him, says he dies at 130. And he had a really great influence on Joash, but once he's gone, there are other officials in Judah who come and they sway the king to follow other gods, but God sends prophets to try to warn him and lead him back. Amazing. It says so Joash has decided to go serve other gods, and one of the prophets that he sends, it says his spirit comes on Zechariah and he prophesies before the people. Why are you violating God's commands? You will not be prosperous. You've rejected the Lord, so the Lord will reject you. And the king, Joash, has Zechariah stoned to death. And at that point, the Lord hands over Judah and Israel over to attacks of Syria. Syria come in and attack. And after the battle, Joash's own servants kill him. And it says it was because he killed the person who prophesied, Zechariah. It was a payback, revenge. But his son, Amaziah, becomes king. He's only 5 years old when he becomes king. He rules for 29 years. It says he followed God, but not wholeheartedly. More revenge. He kills the people who killed his father. They got the cycle of revenge going on. He has this major victory in battle over the Edomites. And at this time, they bring back all this plunder. And one of the things he brings back is their gods. Their idols. It says he brings it, and he personally worships them. Since he turned from God, it says his own people conspire against him and kill him. He's assassinated by his own people. His son Uzziah is then made king. He's king for 22 years. It says he followed God. He was successful in battle and grew in power. He made a very large, strong army. He becomes very powerful, it says, but when he became powerful, it destroyed him. He goes into the temple and offers incense in a disrespectful way, not the way they were supposed to, and the prophets warn him not to do it, but he does it anyways. Only Aaron's descendants were supposed to do what he was doing. And while he's yelling at the priests because he wants to do what he wants to do, he gets a skin disease that appears on his face right then and there, and he runs out of the temple. From then on, he has this skin disease for the rest of his life. It says he had to live in separate quarters even, and he eventually died from it. His son Jotham becomes king. Jotham reigns for 16 years. It says he followed God. He did major repairs on the temple, and he was successful in military campaigns. Next is Jotham's son Ahaz. Ahaz is king for 16 years, says he did not follow God, made images of Baal, he even sacrificed his own son. His own son, he burned him up. And he leads all the people of Judah away from God, and so God punishes them. Syria attacks Judah and Israel. Syria attacks Judah, and then Israel attacks Judah, both devastating defeats to Judah. And then the Edomites attack Judah, then the Philistines attack Judah, and then the Assyrians attack Judah. So calamity after calamity here for them. But Ahaz won't repent, and it says he doubled down on the other gods. He followed them even harder. He smashes all the sacred things in the temple for God. He smashed up the temple. It says eventually he dies. His son Hezekiah becomes king. So amazing the shifts between these kings. Some are awesome, and the next one will be terrible, and then it'll be a great shift. So from Ahaz, the guy smashing up the temple, we get to Hezekiah. Hezekiah follows God. He rules for 29 years. He goes in and repairs the temple. He cleans and purifies the temple. Ahaz had put in all this idols and shrines to other gods in there, so he has the Levites go in. He begins putting them back to work, purifying the temple. They finish purifying it, and they begin to make sacrifices again. They bring out the instruments David had made. They're back, and it takes time, but he gets the whole temple up and running again. And eventually he has all the people celebrate Passover again. They hadn't been celebrating or following their traditions. And it's interesting. He sends a message out to not just Judah, but to Israel as well, to try to get them to return to God. And it says most of the people in Israel laughed at them and mocked them, but some people came back to Judah. But the people of Judah happily followed Hezekiah. They have the biggest Passover celebration since the days of Solomon. After the big festival they have for Passover, the people go out and destroy all the shrines and gods that had been made throughout Judah. They begin bringing huge offerings to the temple. The Levites are working full-time again. And it says Hezekiah is successful as a king because he followed God. It talks about how the Assyrians planned to attack Judah. They had camped around Jerusalem. It's an amazing story. It's interesting, too, how these are retold. Some details are left out, and others are added. So the Assyrian commander is sending letters in, these terrible letters saying he's going to kill them and God won't rescue them, and all kinds of nasty things about God. And Hezekiah begs the Lord for help, and God sends an angel that kills all the soldiers in this Assyrian camp. And it kind of quickly goes through the story. In Kings, it's much more fleshed out. One of my favorite stories. Amazing. Around this time, it goes over Hezekiah got sick, and God heals him, and this is when it adds, but Hezekiah is not thankful to the Lord. Later he repents, and God has mercy on him. It says Hezekiah is extremely rich and prosperous. Babylon sent messengers to ask him about God and the signs that he had given him when he was healed. And as we know, that became part of Judah's downfall later on. That was a mistake, letting these guys from Babylon in. But it says, it doesn't get into that here. That's in Kings. Hezekiah is faithful to God. He dies, and his son Manasseh becomes king. Now we have another shift. He's 12 when he becomes king. He rules for 55 years. He disobeyed God, followed the custom of other nations. So we're right back into it. He builds altars to Baal. He practices magic and witchcraft. And he also sacrifices his own son. God sent prophets to warn Manasseh and the people, but they wouldn't listen. They kept on going. So God lets the Assyrians invade. They capture Manasseh. It says they put a hook in his nose and chains on him, and they take him to Babylon. This is interesting. The way this story reads is a little different to me than the way it's in Kings. Because it says while he's there, Manasseh asks God for forgiveness, and he's eventually allowed to go back to Jerusalem to be king. It says when he returns, he removes all the idols and images of other gods, and he begins rebuilding the temple, and he leads the people back to worshiping God. It's pretty amazing. I feel like I remember in Kings, it went on and on about the evil stuff of Manasseh. But his repentance and coming back to God is pretty incredible. But it says eventually his own officials plot against him and kill him in his palace. And the people are mad about this. The people of Judah kill those officials that assassinated him. His son Josiah becomes king. And that's where we end on our OT reading for this week. A lot of drama there with the kings in Chronicles. And you get good ones and you get bad ones back to back, and a lot of intrigue and coups and assassinations and all kinds of wild stuff there. Really great. Let's jump over to our New Testament reading. We are in John. We've got 14 through 18. So it starts off here in John. A lot of this reading today is Jesus talking to his disciples. So it's him, his teaching to his disciples. And so he's talking to them. It starts off here in 14. He's saying, don't be worried. Have faith in God and me. It's awesome. My Father's house has many rooms. I'm going to prepare a place for each of you. I will come back and I will take you with me. And at the end of that, it's a kind of a famous words of Jesus there. He says, "You know the way to where I am going," which is pretty amazing. And Thomas says, "We don't even know where you're going." I love it. I don't even know what you're talking about. How can we know the way to get there? And I love this stuff, but it's also Jesus speaks in a peculiar way to me. He sometimes he speaks really straightforward to them, and sometimes it seems kind of elusive, but it's not. But as you can see, they're not always grasping what he's talking about, and so. Sometimes it sounds like he's not really answering them, but he is. So Thomas says, "I don't know where you're going. How could I know how to get there?" And he says, "I am the way. I am the way." And he says, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Without me, no one can see the Father." And Philip says, "Show me the Father." And Jesus says, "Philip, I've been with you a long time. Don't you know me by now? When you see me, you see the Father." And it goes into this long thing where he's just talking to them back and forth. And it says, "If you have faith in me, you will do the same things I do. Ask, and I'll do whatever you ask. If you love me, do as I command." That comes up a lot. "Soon the world won't see me, but you will. I will send the Holy Spirit to help you and always be with you and show you what is true. Because I live, you will live, If you love me, do what I have said. Here it is again. I will love you and show you what I'm like. And the disciples are saying, what do you mean you'll show us, but you're not going to show the world? Meaning the world won't see him. He keeps talking about how he's leaving and they're not going to see him, but they'll see him later, and it's just confusing for them. And he says, again, if anyone loves me, they will obey me. I will come and I will live in them. But if they don't love me, they won't obey. The Father will send the Holy Spirit to take my place. I give you peace only I can give, not like this world, so don't be worried and afraid. I'm telling you before I leave. I can't speak much longer. This is interesting, because the ruler of this world is coming. What? But he has no power over me. I obey the Father. Amazing. They get into 15. He's still talking to his disciples. He says, I am the true vine. The Father is the gardener. He cuts away the branches that don't produce fruit. He trims those that don't produce fruit so they can produce even more. It's amazing, this be fruitful and multiply idea is so core to the gospel, to the scriptures. We're supposed to be producing more than ourselves. So he's saying, stay joined to me and I will stay joined to you. If you can produce fruit, you can't produce fruit unless you are connected to me. There we go. If you are not joined to me, you will be thrown away. Remain in my love. If you obey, you will remain in my love. That's how you remain in his love. I tell you this so your joy may be in you and full. My command is to love one another as I have loved you. And again, this is getting near the end for Jesus. His time is coming, and he's getting down to, he's speaking more and more plainly to his disciples on the main point of his ministry, which is the love command. Love one another as I have loved you. And he talks about his love.